In America in particular, this family-centered growth coincided with what many considered to be the golden age of capitalism, when homes were inexpensive. The end of World War II caused a massive spike in fertility around the world, giving rise to the largest generation in history, the so-called baby boomers. The free market was supplying consumers with novel goods. The only thing left to do was to get busy creating a family, as jobs could offer a secure and comfortable existence. It doesn't really matter if this sounds like such a romanticized and almost untrue depiction of history. With today's high cost of living, excessive consumption of disposable consumer goods, and very precarious employment, it goes without saying that the most urgent issue facing governments worldwide is how to encourage individuals to conceive. Working families increasingly find childcare to be more costly than rent, and the annual cost of childcare bills from income taxes costs the economy over $122 billion. It's the first time. What is the most important adjustment that South Korea needs to make in order to attract more women? Beginning the next year, South Korea will give new parents a childcare allowance of about $530 USD. Population collapse, not explosion, will be the most pressing issue in the next 20 years. An unchecked population drop is a grave concern that will affect everyone who intends to survive past the next 20 years. Although they may sound similar, there are two very different solutions depending on how you view the issue, or whether you even consider it to be an issue at all. It's crucial to distinguish between those who are worried about what a population decline means and those who are worried about not having a ready stream of available labor produced for them. We must clear up some history before we can comprehend why. There was more to the 1950s baby boom than just individuals coming home from war and starting to work. The fact that there was no baby boom following World War I is the simplest way to understand this. Birth rates actually fell to levels quite comparable to those of today after 1918, and a brief decline during the Spanish flu. It somewhat contradicts the story. If you followed the general media's coverage of population collapse, you've likely heard that it's a completely contemporary phenomena brought on by, well, whatever issue you want to name with the modern world. However, that isn't totally true. Contrary to appearances, the fertility rate back here was considerably lower. Understanding tube numbers is necessary because the fertility rate is typically represented by the number of births per woman as well as the replacement rate. The replacement rate, which is the number of children the typical woman must have in order to sustain the population in the modern world, is roughly 2.1 children per woman in America and the majority of other high-income nations. The reason for the two is that men and women make up half of the population by nature. The average woman must thus have 2 children in order to accommodate for that. The first argument is that, regrettably, some kids never reach adulthood, where they would be able to start a family. The national and worldwide fertility rates have been the focus of unusually intense attention from politicians of all stripes to your crazy uncle at Thanksgiving. However, what is less well known is that the replacement rate is also variable and has been falling. Since the infant mortality rate was significantly higher in the 1920s than it is now, people needed to have more than 3 children on average to maintain the population. This means that the population was actually declining more quickly than it is today, and this was before modern contraceptives made it common for women to work. Our current demographic trends are attributed to the dissolution of family values, or whatever else it may be. The Post. World War II economy was so strong that it was simple to start a family, which was another factor for the baby boom. Even though the post-war economy was booming in the roaring 20s, fewer individuals were having children. In actuality, the birth rate didn't begin to rebound until 1929, when the Great Depression forced a startling number of American families back into relative poverty. As you can see from the data, the baby boom actually began in the 1930s, when the American economy was arguably at its weakest point in the previous century. Although there was a lull during the war, the post-war baby boom that we are now accustomed to was essentially a continuation of an earlier pattern. What, therefore, was the real cause of the birth rate decline in those days, if it wasn't contraception, women entering the workforce, economic expansion, urbanization, or contemporary family values? The baby boom was brought on by the same thing. I'm teaching you this history lesson because it has the potential to address many of the current issues with our population. You may not like the response, though. Income inequality is one of the most persistent baby barriers. Data on income inequality over the past century was gathered and compiled by economist Thomas Piketty for his book Capital in the 21st Century. Just a moment. It quotes C.S. easy to read and is arguably one of the best economics books ever published, even to others who are not economists. In any case, the data Piketty gathered on income disparity almost exactly matches a fertility rate when reversed. If individuals believe they are not lagging behind, They will have more children if they are able to give what is regarded as a pleasant life and they have social mobility. Income disparity was drastically decreased by the New Deal, which served as the cornerstone for the Great Depression recovery efforts and the GI Bill after World War II. As a result, the number of babies increased. This is a major issue, though, because while many in positions of authority do wish to prevent a population shortage, they do not want it to happen that way. In order to force people to have children without, giving them too much, it is necessary to understand how money works. The average population growth rate throughout the 10,000 years between the beginning of human civilization and the Industrial Revolution, according to archaeological data, was a mere 4% per generation. It hardly registered at all. Significant setbacks nevertheless occurred, like as the Black Plague, which killed between 25% and 50% of Europe's population. The population didn't really change since, on average, people had a lot more children, but less of them lived. The Industrial Revolution followed, which started a little feedback loop. More people could be fed and provided for by mechanized industry and agriculture, and more people meant more work and more innovations to feed and provide for more people. People also lived longer thanks to advancements in nutrition and medicine, which allowed them to use their knowledge to create a more prosperous society overall. According to the best estimations, about 7% of all people who have ever lived are still living today, which has been very beneficial for business. Because there were more prospective customers to serve and a ready supply of workers to work in the new factories. Population growth naturally boosted industry. London and other early industrial hubs grew extraordinarily wealthy, but some recognizable patterns were already evident. Living in a city during the Industrial Revolution was a terrible experience. They learned to establish industries far more quickly than they learned to build sanitary facilities. Therefore, foodborne infections, infectious illnesses, and malnutrition were more common in these densely populated areas. Up until the 20th century, London was mostly dependent on people migrating from the countryside to find employment in order to sustain its population because so many people died there. With the notable exception of San Francisco, the majority of high-income cities finally realized that it was not a good idea to leave human excrement in the street. Therefore, cities are still demographic black holes with extremely low birth rates that depend on people moving there to sustain themselves, even though they are no longer actively killing their residents. That's merely due to the high cost of cities. A family-sized property near a big city is definitely out of your price range unless you are incredibly affluent, and depending on your line of work, you may not be able to relocate outside of those cities without losing your job. There is currently a trend that having several children indicates either extreme wealth or severe poverty, with limited space for large middle-class families because it is just no longer affordable in the majority of cities worldwide. We have now ran out of individuals to draw from the rural areas with high birth rates during the last 3 centuries. Thus, the trend has spread around the world, and people from high birth rate nations are now drawn to the majority of developed economies. The problem has been concealed by the increase in immigration to meet labor shortages, but it has also led to other issues, such as making housing more affordable and pushing salaries down while increasing income disparity. The fact that many people who desire a steady supply of young workers would, to put it mildly, greatly prefer it if those workers were domestically produced is another unsubtle reality. In all of this now, allowing people to work outside of the city is another easy answer. The most recent worldwide incident that affected birth rates was the COVID pandemic. As more dual-income households switched to working from home, births surged and not only offset the first decline but also surpassed forecast trends. At first, it caused a steep decline as people lost their jobs and hospitals could hardly handle the demand. Naturally, when parents don't have to go into an office, it's easier to manage a pregnancy and raise kids. It makes it possible for people to live farther from business hubs in more affordable and family-friendly neighborhoods. The good news is that we do have some control over this, even though this reality is making some Jimmies uncomfortable because businesses want workers to return to the workplace for a variety of reasons. Forcing someone to have children is extremely difficult, even with drastic means. Therefore, companies will lose their future employees and customers if they reject rules that support equality or allow people to work from home. The CEOs themselves are urging employees to return to the office, even though they don't really show up for work. So if you want further proof of the advantages of working remotely, look no further. Watch this video to see how they are making that work for them.